Oh, good evening, everybody. Yes, once again, I am your host, Betsy Bird, and we are presenting today a fantastic new edition of Fuse Number 8 TV. Today, our special guest is the one and the only, the fantastic Aaron Starmer. Aaron Starmer, who you may recall, is the author of The Riverman, which was amazing, and is also author of the upcoming The Whisper. We're going to have a lot to talk to him about today, but for right now, hello, hi. For now, we're actually going to begin here on this incredibly gloomy, rainy, disgusting day in New York City, and I pray by the time you see this, it is no longer disgusting where you live. We're going to begin today with another edition of Reading Too Much into Picture Books. And today's book, is not, yes, fine, not technically a picture book. If you want to be technical about it, this is an easy book, much like the last easy book that I did. But I would like to point out, this easy book is special. It is also, you'll recall, last time I read a little too much into Go Dog Go. This time I am reading a little too much into Are You My Mother? Now you might say to yourself, how can you read too much into this beloved, adorable classic? Well, this is yet another interpretation from my brother-in-law, who has told me that this is in fact the story of a little baby bird wandering through a post-apocalyptic hellscape. Think about it. Okay, first of all, the color scheme of this book is, well, it's brown. It's very brown. In fact, if you're going to get really technical about it, there is not much green. Note the tree? That's a dead tree. That's a dead tree. Now, this little baby bird wanders through, you see no greenery in this book, through this bizarre landscape. And it starts out innocently enough with the little kitten, like, oh, kitten's cute. And the bird, and the cow, and the dog, not necessarily in that order. Now, at this point, the book begins to take a bit of a strange nosedive. Please note, if you will, that there are no people in this book, but there are machines that seem to move on their own. So, sentient machines, note that. Again, no greenery, but bizarre things that are just sort of moving around. It's very strange. And of course, you get to the snort. The snort, there is no human operating the snort that anyone can see. It lovingly deposits, after this nightmarish sequence, the baby bird back in its nest for no apparent reason. But you will notice look at this landscape. This is a dead world. A dead world, and we are living in it. And the only things left are various wildlife and the occasional worm. I'm happy to report it does have a happy ending. So yeah. So next time you read this one to your kiddo, just think to yourself, oh dear God, why those fools? What they did. So that's Are You My Mother? Yes. So that was Reading Too Much into Picture Books, a series that I like to do where I would like to inform you that is not the actual interpretation that I believe in with this book. But at the same time, you can't help but wonder, is that actually how the book is supposed to be read? Now, as I mentioned, today our special guest is Aaron Starmer. And Aaron has written several books for children, but these are the two most recent. And I would just like to point out, if you have not read either of them, you are to stop watching this right now, to go and read them, and then to come back and join us. But Aaron, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So this is difficult because I have The Whisper here, and what I want to do is to spoil every plot twist in this book, which I will not do. So I think before I even begin with this, maybe we should give like a rundown of what the plot of the first book, The Riverman, was about. Which do you have like a quickie synopsis that you do, or would you like me to try to encapsulate it?
I mean, I can try, and then if I'm failing miserably, you can jump in and pick it up. I often tell people it's a story of a young man named Alistair Cleary, and he's growing up in a small town in northern New York in the 80s. and his neighbor Fiona Loomis comes over to his house and tells him that she's visiting an alternate dimension through a portal in her basement. And in this alternate dimension, there's a creature named the Riverman, and he's stealing the souls of children. And Fiona fears that her soul will be next. And so Alistair has to figure out whether she's telling the truth, that there is such thing as magic, or whether something dark and sinister is happening in her home life that's even more frightening than this Riverman creature. So that's sort of the basic plot of the first book, and it's about questioning reality versus magic. Um, as for the second one, I don't know what I'm going to tell you about that.
Yeah, and I don't know what I can ask about it. I mean, so if one looks at the cover and one can make interpretations from it there, I think one thing I would like to say is, did you always intend this to be a trilogy, or did you write the first as a standalone and then feel like maybe a trilogy was in order? How did that happen?
I mean, while I was writing the first one, I decided that it would be a trilogy. So I hadn't had everything mapped out, but it was the intention from, the point that I'd gotten to 30 or 40 pages in that this was going to be a bigger story. But I wanted the first one to feel like a standalone, and that was sort of how it was released, at least in the advanced reader copies. And I think a lot of people got upset because they were like, there is more after this, and because it certainly ends on a cliffhanger, and I don't apologize for that, because I think it can work as a standalone, but I also wanted it to sort of bridge into a larger story, which is what The Whisper is. It's sort of a more epic adventure.
Yes, I remember reading the first one and being amazed when I heard that it was the first in a series. I actually thought it was just a standalone in and of itself. And then sort of being like, no, it can't. There can't be a second one. But and I have a very weird interpretation of the first book, and I was like, no, if there's a sequel, it ruins my interpretation, and it doesn't. I would like to say that you can
That's
read
good.
this with my own, and I can't say what my wacky interpretation is, but this completely can be interpreted a bunch of different ways, just as the first book can be interpreted a whole bunch of different ways. So that was good. That was nice. Um, did you know where this book in particular was going when you wrote it, or did you map it out, or did it surprise you?
Um, I knew a certain points that I was going to hit, and I knew what the ending was going to be, which was very important in terms of setting up what the third book is. And again, I'm not going to spoil what the ending of this one is, but it gives you a perspective on the first that you might not necessarily have had. And all of the books, including the third one, is the point of is to ask, where is the person telling the story from, and who is telling this story, and why are they telling this story at this moment in time, and what are their motivations behind it. And as you read each book, hopefully your mind changes a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, one thing I'd interviewed you in a panel discussion in a bookstore at one point, and you had mentioned something about your book that didn't even occur to me reading it or even afterwards, but then later I was like, oh, of course. You had mentioned, I think there was some influence of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe on this series, and in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, you have a fantasy world where they grow up and become adults, and then they walk through a door and they're back to being children again, and that's, to a kid, maybe very enticing, but to an adult, I think it's like a horror story. And so was there? I mean, there is a bit of that to the series, is there not?
Yeah, I mean that was actually one of the very first sort of motivating factors behind the story is sort of kids that are growing old in another world, and I wanted to sort of explore that as other kids that they're having relationships with are sort of on their own timeline. So, whatever you want to read into what that is a metaphor for, that's fine. But the the definite influence was stuff like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where even as a kid, I wasn't disturbed by it, but I found it kind of strange that someone could go off and become a queen of another land and then come back 20 or 30 years later and just pick things up where she left off.
Yeah, best case scenario, the youngest one is 15, maybe, but even then, it's just,
Right. I
yeah.
don't remember the exact timelines, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I remember being more disturbed by the fact that they were all kings and queens together, but they were all brothers and sisters, and I was like, what? How does that work? But that I was a weird kid. Um, do you consider the series middle grade or young adult? Because this is something that a lot of librarians have sort of wrestled with when reading the first book, certainly. And I don't know, maybe reading the second book too. So,
Uh,
what's your take?
I mean, I would like to consider them both if possible. I don't write with that so much in mind. Now the characters are, you know, ages are 12 and 13, and so that sort of puts it in the middle grade camp. But I do realize thematically there is a lot of stuff that's going on that's more appropriate for YA or more, more mature than what's going on in a lot of middle grade books. But I think it can be enjoyed by a 10 or 11-year-old who's not picking up on everything, because I hope that there are elements of it that is just good storytelling that young people can relate to. And then I also hope that a 16 or 17-year-old can pick it up and be sort of nostalgic about that time, or sort of think more deeply about that time.
Yeah, we actually kind of consider it a middle school book, which there is no place in a public library for middle school books. They either end up
Right.
in the children's section or they end up in the teen section. Yay.
Oh,
Um,
buy two copies. That's what I tell people.
that's what we did with this year's Newbery book, the crossover. We initially bought that on the YA side and on the Juve side, and then boom, ends up in Wayne Newbery. So well done us. We had twice as many copies.
There you go.
Yeah. Um, now this cover. What do you think of your covers? I've always been rather fond of your covers, but
I mean,
really,
I think they're fantastic because um, it's done by a young artist named Yelena Brixnikova. I always pronounce her name wrong, and I apologize for that. But she also did the cover of Under the Egg, and she's I think doing some other books that are going to be coming out. But fantastic style, and she would read the books, and we would tell her sort of the imagery we wanted in the covers, and she would sort of slip it in. And if you read the books, you'll find little almost Easter eggs in the covers of things that happened, or just little things that you don't expect. If
you
you
have.
read the Whisper, there's a hummingbird there that is a sort of interesting character. So that's all I'll say.
I will ask you no questions about the hummingbird at all. But I am a little curious. She included this scene, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. Did you have any input on what scenes she put on here, or was this all her?
I don't remember. That's one of my favorite scenes, and that was actually when I started writing it. That was the opening scene of the book, and then I changed it to happen further. But it's really a scene that sort of sets the tone of the relationship between Alistair and his best friend Charlie. Excuse me, but yeah, I suspect that either she read it and picked that out, or the editor or the designer said we need something from that scene. But again, there's water is a big theme in the books, and so I needed snow in this one. I wanted snow on the cover, so it was a snowy scene.
Huh. Okay, yeah, no, because I thought it was very canny when I got to that scene. I was like, wait, oh my God! So yeah, I was quite impressed with that as a choice. Um, so yeah, I assume you're probably done with number three at this point. Is that correct?
Completely done. Little some proofreading to do, but that's all. So
And
yeah,
that's coming out next year,
next
20.
year, March next year.
Oh wow, that's pretty soon. Okay.
So yeah, March of each year they've come out the last three years. So
And then, do you know what you're going to do after number three, or are you keeping sort of that under wraps while you work on it?
I have a young adult novel coming out hopefully in fall of 2006 that I will just be handing in, and that's called Spontaneous. It's about a high school full of kids that start to spontaneously combust.
I have been looking for spontaneous combustion books. I was obsessed with them when I was a teenager, and we have nothing on that these days. Oh, I'm so pleased to hear
It's going
that.
to be the new trend. There's going to be 5 or 6 of them coming out in the next year.
Exactly. Oh, the publisher, like the release parties will be amazing. Just fire hazards galore. Oh, you could get really creative with it. Yes. Oh, that's so good to hear.
So
Do
that's
you
a
know the time?
standalone. So because there's not many people standing by the end of it is basically the problem with that one.
Just a shrunken head here and a foot there. Yeah. You can see what I picked up on as a teenager. Fantastic. Well, I'm going to look forward to that. I'm very, very pleased. So, folks, y'all need to go out and buy this book. It is incredibly good. And thank you so much for joining me this evening and
Thank you.
talking about your books. Yeah, it's fantastic. So I would like to thank, of course, our fantastic sponsor for this particular event. We have Macmillan's Children's Books. This is our contact there, Michelle Campbell, if you would like to contact her in any way. And of course, this is presented by School Library Journal, which you can get on your iPad and go on the go, should you choose to do so. So thank you so much, folks, for joining us today, and we will see you next time.